But let's start off with data channels. As I click on data channels, it's going to take me to a specific panel. I can make some different decisions here. For instance, the number of training channels. For the Atlantis hardware, we have 1, 2, or 4 if we're dealing with an Atlantis 4x4, for instance. If we're using the Discovery, we're going to see a little bit later on some different options that we have. But basically, I look at this screen, I see 4 channels is good because I'm going to do a simple 4-channel Z-score training. Okay. My digital filter order, I'm going to change that to 3. Okay. The reason lower order is a little faster, it's a little easier for a client if they're just beginning into neurofeedback to get the hang of it. As you go up in filter order, it gets a little trickier to make the specific waves that you're asking for, so oftentimes it can be a little frustrating for a beginner in neurofeedback. So we're going to start at 3. Okay. Our sum channel mode, this is not used for Z-score training, so I'm going to make sure that stays off. Again, that's one of those modes that's more for advanced use. There's a good chance you'll never even use that mode. Okay. The 4-channel sum method is also related to that. So again, whether it's split or combined, as long as the one above it is off, it doesn't matter. Okay. Peak to peak in RMS. Just about everybody in the industry at this point in time uses peak to peak. RMS was a measure, or root mean squared, that was very popular probably about 10 years ago or so. But as the computers and the PCs have gotten faster, everybody's moved to a peak to peak measurement. So it is defaulted there, and more likely you're going to keep it there. The Lexicor file output is specific for Discovery. That's for if you're doing a QEEG and you want a specific file output, which certain databases can only read. If you have one of the older databases that you're trying to process the file in, it may require a Lexicor file output, and then you could turn that on. If it's off, then it's always defaulting to an EDF, which most of your newer databases are able to read. Okay. The artifact rejection threshold, or the artifact threshold, starts at 240, or it may be at 255 depending on which version of the software you have. I like to move this down to 90, and the reason being is there's an actual threshold field so that you can see it on the screen. If I have it at 240 or 255, it's out of the visual field and I can't see it. To adjust it down takes several seconds, and you're hitting the R key over and over and over. If I have it at 90, I can adjust it very quickly right from the training screen. So keep that in mind. Our low frequency cutoff, which I show here, is specifically if you are wanting to basically remove all lower frequencies below 0.5 hertz. Okay, so most of the time you're going to leave that on, especially if you're doing any kind of ILF training or anything like that. If you're in a very hostile environment and you're getting a lot of noise, oftentimes the low frequency cutoff, if you enable it, it helps. It'll go ahead and remove some of that lower delta noise or artifact. When it comes to your software notch filters, it's a good idea to know what you're working with as you start. So I'm a big fan of having them off when you first start so that you can see the quality of signal. From there, you can always add it if you have a little bit of noise or a little bit of fuzziness to the signal, but you want to make sure you know what you're working with. If you default both of these on, especially in a Discovery, it's going to give you a different mode, and you note that right under the little option here that says note, using both 50 and 60 hertz filters produce a bandwidth of 1.5 hertz to 40 hertz. And this is mindset compatible, and that's a different QEEG device out there that people are used to a specific spectrum. So using them both will give you that mode. However, in the Atlantis, using them both will simply put both a 60 and 50 hertz notch filter on, which is oftentimes way overkill. You shouldn't have to do that. In the US, 60 is the most popular for the notch filter. Asia, Europe, South America, 50 hertz you would use there. You should not need them both, so keep that in mind. Okay, but again, Start with it off, only put it on if needed. It's a good trick to stick by. The data sampling rate already pre-selected at 256. The device is sampling internally much faster, repacking and sending to the PC at 256. Both the Atlantis and the current Discovery sample internally at 1,024 samples per second, and then they repack and send it to the PC at 256 just to make data transfer a little more reasonable. Okay. The last button that we did not talk about is a Discovery acquisition control. Now this is specific for the Discovery. This is not for Atlantis. But as I go ahead and I click on this button, I'm going to see a panel that's going to show me a 1020 placement with a few additional options. It's going to show you a standard 19 channel example where each of the different sites are selected. If I'm using Discovery and I simply want to do 4-channel training, what I like to do is simply deselect them all, and then what I can do is I can then add the training channels, okay? So that you can see it's just C3, C4 right now, okay? Because if I acquire all 19, but I'm only putting on 4 electrodes on the head, I'm going to see all kind of noise all over the screen. So our goal is that we only want to acquire what we're going to train. Now, for Atlantis, you don't have to worry about this. The screen has no meaning for the Atlantis. This is only for Discovery users that have a 24-channel device. So keep that in mind. I'm also going to select P3, P4 because this particular example, I am going to do 4 channels. So I'm going to do C3, C4, P3, P4. Okay? Then I can also, if I always want to make changes, I can make sure that they stick by simply hitting use these settings. That gives it an additional save, kind of like saving your work when you're working with Microsoft Word and not waiting for there to be a problem. You just continue to save as you build your protocol. So I'm going to go back to where we were, which was the channel. We're back to the data channels window. We've made our Discovery acquisition control. We made all our adjustments on the data channel screen. Let's now take a look at the electrodes and trainee info. Okay, this is kind of like a montage editor. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and simply then match C3, C4, which we just saw on the Discovery acquisition screen. I'm going to open up channels 3 and channel 4, and I chose P3, P4. And you notice that the reference is LE, meaning linked ears. Okay? Again, I've made these changes. I use these settings. Again, it saves that change. Okay? So I can once again go back to channels. And I notice everything on this screen is now done. Okay? As I go to my next tab over is bands. This is just telling you currently the components selected. We have 8 components selected. They're defined. We have our raw EEG, we have our delta, our theta, our alpha, our low beta, beta, high beta, gamma in user. They're already predefined frequency bandwidths. These are adjustable, but keep in mind if we're doing Z-score training, they're predefined based on the normative database we're using, so that you really don't want to change these, or even if you do, for the actual Z-score training itself, they are always going to default back to the correct bandwidths that the database is looking at. It's very important. However, if you're doing traditional neurofeedback and you want to either modify a specific component, call it my favorite component, I can change the bandwidths to anything I want, the frequencies can overlap, you can go down here and add up to 15 different components, so you're not limited to just 8. You see these other ones are available. Just as I start to check them, they become lit up, and then I can take them back off. Okay, so something to keep in mind. If I make a bunch of changes and then I can't remember basically where I started, we also have a standard settings button to bring you back to a default. Pretty important if you've made a lot of changes and you decided, you know what, I really don't want to do that. Okay?